All right, let's dive into the world of Germanic languages. Today we're looking at this article from Lingualid. It's called Germanic Languages, a comprehensive guide.
Sounds like a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to find out that English is part of this huge language family, along with, well, a bunch of others that I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with.
Right, like German or Dutch even.
Exactly. So we're going to uncover some cool stuff about how English is related to all these other languages like German, Dutch, and even Afrikanese.
You can actually think about it like a family tree, with tons of branches all coming from the same root. And that root, the ancestor of all these languages, it's called Proto-Germanic.
Proto-Germanic. Wow, that sounds ancient. How far back are we talking here?
Oh, Proto-Germanic was spoken way back, from around 500 BCE to the 5th century CE. Pretty wild to think about, right?
It is. So when we're talking about Germanic languages today,
Yeah.
just how many people are we talking about? Like how many speakers are there?
Yeah. Well, over 520 million people speak a Germanic language as their native language. And get this, a whopping 2 billion speak one as a second language.
Oh, wow. That's a huge chunk of the world.
hmm
It really makes you realize just how big this language family is, how influential it is.
Absolutely. And when you start looking at the different branches of the family tree, you see all sorts of interesting similarities between the languages.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, the article talks about the word house.
Okay.
In English, it's house. Simple enough.
Right?
But in German, it's Haus. In Dutch, it's Huis. And in Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian, it's Hus. Isn't that interesting?
It is. It's like they all share some kind of common DNA, even though they've, obviously evolved in different directions.
Exactly. And that shared ancestry is why you see similarities not just in, well, individual words, but also in their alphabets. You see it in how they structure sentences and even in their core vocabulary. It's like they all inherited a common set of building blocks.
So how do linguists even begin to organize this massive family? Like, where do they start?
Well, they've divided it into three main branches. You got Northern, Eastern, and Western Germanic. You can picture it like a tree, with three major limbs.
Okay, I can see that. So let's start with the Eastern Germanic branch. What's special about that one?
Well, sadly, most of the languages in that branch are actually extinct, but that doesn't mean they aren't important.
Right, of course not.
One of the languages in this branch, Gothic, is actually the earliest attested Germanic language.
Attested. Sorry, what does that mean?
It basically means we have written evidence of it.
Oh, okay.
And we actually have Gothic texts that have survived from as early as the 4th century.
Wow.
It's like looking through a window into the past. It allows us to see how those early Germanic people thought and interacted with the world.
That's incredible. Imagine reading something written almost 1,700 years ago. That's a direct link to history.
I know.
But I'm also curious about the branch that's having the biggest impact on the world today. Western Germanic. Yeah.
Ah, yes. Western Germanic. That's where you find the big ones, like English, German, and Dutch. It's a branch that many of us interact with every single day, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely encounter at least one of those languages every day. So just how many people are we talking about when we consider Western Germanic?
Well, about 500 million people speak a Western Germanic language natively. That's a huge number. And then, of course, there are millions more who speak one as a second language.
Because that leaves us with the Northern Germanic branch, right?
That's right.
What makes that one unique? What sets it apart?
Well, Northern Germanic is also known as Scandinavian or Nordic languages. And what's cool is that they all descended from Old Norse. And you know what? Even after all these centuries, they still have this pretty good degree of mutual intelligibility.
Mutual intelligibility, meaning.
Basically, it means that speakers of different languages in this branch can often understand each other to a certain degree. Like someone speaking Swedish can often understand someone speaking Norwegian and vice versa.
So it's almost like they can speak to each other in their own language and still understand each other.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It really shows how closely related these languages are, even after all this time. So let's say you, our listener, are feeling inspired. You're thinking about picking up another one of these Germanic languages. Do you think knowing English already gives you a leg up?
Absolutely. Knowing English already is a huge advantage if you want to learn another Germanic language. The grammar and vocabulary have so many similarities, so it's not as difficult as you might think.
That's really encouraging to hear. I've always been a bit intimidated by the thought of learning another language. But now I'm thinking maybe it's not as hard as I thought, especially with all these similarities.
It's definitely worth exploring.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Germanic languages. I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking about that question we left you with last time. Like, if you had to pick one, Which Germanic language would you learn and why?
It's a tough one for sure. So many interesting languages, all with their own unique appeal.
I know, right? And in this part of our deep dive, we're going to get into even more of what makes these languages so fascinating, both linguistically and culturally. But first, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about how learning one Germanic language can actually help you learn others.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the coolest things about language families. It's like learning an instrument, you know? Once you've got the basics down on one, say the piano,
Uh-huh.
it's so much easier to pick up another one. Like maybe the guitar.
I get it. So the underlying structure is already there.
Yeah.
It's almost like having a decoder ring for a whole family of languages.
Exactly.
And cool. But, okay, let's go back to those cultural contributions we were discussing. I know you're a big fan of Norse mythology, and I'm curious to hear more about why those stories resonate with you so much.
You know, for me, Norse mythology is like a glimpse into, well, like the soul of a people. It shows their values, their beliefs, even how they understood the world around them.
Yeah.
And the stories of Odin, Thor, Loki, they're all full of adventure and drama and moral dilemmas that, well, they still kind of captivate us today, don't they?
They do. And it's amazing to see how those ancient myths have kind of like worked their way into our modern culture, from Marvel movies to video games to even heavy metal music.
Exactly. It's a testament to how strong those stories are. And it's not just Norse mythology that's had such an impact. Think about the philosophical contributions that have come from German thinkers. People like Kant, Nietzsche, Heidegger, I mean, they had a profound effect on how we think about, well, just about everything, from ethics and metaphysics to the very nature of reality.
Wow. It's crazy to think about how much intellectual, I don't know, like firepower has come from just this one branch of the Germanic language family.
It really is.
And it's not just philosophy, right?
Yeah.
What about literature? I know you're a fan of English literature, but are there other Germanic literary traditions that you find particularly interesting or exciting?
Absolutely. I'm really drawn to the Icelandic
Oh,
sagas.
yeah, the sagas.
They're epic tales, you know, full of adventure and love and revenge, all set against the backdrop of Viking Age Iceland.
Right.
And the language itself is just, well, it's incredibly powerful, full of vivid imagery and drama.
I've got to admit, I've always been a little intimidated by the Icelandic sagas. I
Hmm.
kind of picture them as these like dense, super long books that only scholars can really understand, you know?
I mean, they can be challenging for sure, especially if you aren't familiar with the historical context. But there's some really good translations out there now that make them much more accessible. And honestly, once you get over that initial hurdle, you won't be able to put them down. The stories are that captivating.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'm adding Icelandic sagas to my reading list. But okay, let's go back to this idea of language preservation for a minute. We talked about how crucial it is to protect these lesser-known languages, you know, to prevent them from disappearing completely. But I'm curious about the like specific challenges that are involved in that.
Well, one of the biggest challenges is just a lack of resources, honestly. A lot of these endangered languages are spoken in pretty remote communities,
Yeah.
places with limited access to education or even technology.
So it's not just about documenting these languages, but also about giving those communities the tools they need to like keep them alive.
Exactly. It's about supporting language revitalization efforts. It's about creating learning materials and making sure the younger generations feel a sense of pride in these languages.
I see.
And actually, technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in all of this.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, you know, we've got digital archives now that are used to preserve recordings and written texts of endangered languages. This makes them available to researchers and anyone who wants to learn them anywhere in the world. And online learning platforms are making it easier for people to learn these languages, even if they don't live in those communities where they're spoken.
That's amazing. So technology is like breathing new life into these languages, connecting them with a global audience.
Exactly. It's
Amazing.
helping to ensure they'll be around for future generations. It's pretty inspiring, actually.
I agree. And it makes you realize that language preservation isn't just for like linguists or academics. I don't, we can
Yeah.
all contribute in some way.
Absolutely. Whether it's learning a new language, donating to organizations that are doing this work, or even just, you know, spreading the word about how important it is to protect these languages,
Right.
we can all make a difference.
And, you know, one of the most rewarding parts of learning a new language is that it gives you the opportunity to connect with people from different cultures with different backgrounds.
It's like opening a window to a whole new world of experience and perspectives.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is the joys and challenges of language learning. We've talked about why it's important to learn new languages, but now I want to get into the, like, how to.
Sure.
So imagine our listeners ready to jump in and start learning a new Germanic language. Where do they even begin?
That's the big question. And there's no magic answer, no one solution. It really comes down to the individual learner, their learning style, what they want to achieve.
Right. So some people might do great in a classroom, while others might prefer a more independent approach. And then you've got all the language learning apps and online resources. It can be a bit overwhelming.
It can be, for sure. But that's kind of part of the adventure, wouldn't you say? It's about finding what clicks for you and, enjoying the ride.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are some of the key things to think about when you're trying to choose a language learning method?
Well, first off, I always ask, what kind of learner are you? Do you like structure, someone telling you what to do, or do you prefer a more immersive, hands-on style?
That makes sense.
Okay.
Because there's so many different ways to learn now, from traditional textbooks and classes to apps and these like online immersion programs.
Exactly. And the best method for you is the one that you'll actually stick with. So if you thrive in a structured environment, maybe a traditional language class would be a good fit. But if you like to learn at your own pace, on your own terms, then a language learning app could be the way to go.
I know for me, I'm a very visual learner, so I always gravitate toward things that have like pictures, videos, and those kinds of interactive exercises.
That's a great example. And the beauty of it is there are so many resources out there now that cater to different learning styles. So whether you're a visual learner, an auditory learner, or even like a kinesthetic learner, there's something out there that'll help you succeed.
But it's not just about finding the right method, right?
Mm.
It's also about like setting realistic goals
Yeah.
and then figuring out how to stay motivated.
Oh, absolutely. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time and dedication to reach fluency.
And I think it's important to celebrate those little wins along the way,
Yeah.
like when you finally master a new grammar rule or you're able to have even a simple conversation.
Absolutely. Those little victories can keep you going. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're totally normal, part of the process.
I think that's what trips a lot of people up. The fear of messing up, especially when you're just starting out.
Yeah, I get that. But it's so important to see those mistakes as learning opportunities. And remember, everyone makes mistakes when they're learning a new language. Even native speakers sometimes.
It's true. It's true. Okay, so let's say our listener has picked their language. They've found a way to learn that works for them. They've set some achievable goals. Any practical tips on how they can stay motivated, how they can like really maximize their learning experience?
One of the most important things is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible.
Okay.
Surround yourself with it. Music, movies, TV shows, podcasts, books, you name it.
I love that. It's like you're creating your own little world, a little language bubble.
Exactly. The more you're exposed to the language, the more natural it will start to feel. And don't be afraid to practice speaking, even if you're just starting out. Find a language partner, join a group, or even just chat with someone at, I don't know, your local coffee shop.
I know. It can be scary at first, but it's the best way to become more fluent and more confident.
It really is. And most people are really understanding and supportive, especially if they see you making an effort to learn.
So don't be shy. Put yourself out there.
I agree. Every interaction is a chance to learn and grow.
You know what?
Yeah.
You've inspired me. I think I'm going to dust off my Duolingo app and get back to learning Norwegian.
That's awesome. And I think that's the beauty of all of this, right? It's not just about abstract ideas. It's about how language connects to real life, to our personal interests. It's a journey of discovery, not only about the language itself, but also about ourselves and the world.
I love that.
And it's a journey we can all take, no matter who we are or how old we are.
Well said. So as we wrap up this second part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with a challenge. Just one small thing you can do today to keep moving forward on your language journey.
It could be anything, really. Download a language learning app, sign up for a class, maybe even just commit to listening to a podcast in another language during your commute. Whatever it is, take that step. Embrace the adventure.
We'll be back soon for the final part of our deep dive into the world of Germanic languages. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into those fascinating Germanic languages. I'm really glad we get to wrap up our exploration together. I hope you are too.
Me too. It's been a great journey so far. We've talked about, everything from those early days of Proto-Germanic to how these languages have contributed to culture throughout history.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. We've even touched on like the nuts and bolts of actually learning a new language. But for this last part, I really want to bring it all together. We've been talking about the big picture, the historical side of things. But what does all this mean for someone who's, well, just curious about languages? Like, what if they're thinking about learning another one?
That's where it gets really practical, right? If you've ever felt kind of intimidated by the idea of learning a whole new language, well, knowing about language families can totally change the game.
It's like, finding out you have a distant relative who's super successful in, I don't know, like astrophysics or something. Maybe you have a knack for it too.
Exactly. And if you speak English, you already have a head start when it comes to learning another Germanic language. The connections are already there, built in. It's not about becoming fluent overnight, obviously, but recognizing those shared patterns. It can make the whole process feel a lot less scary.
Okay, so let's play pretend for a minute. Let's say our listener's thinking, all right, this is interesting, but which one should I actually go for? Which Germanic language? What advice would you give them?
Well, I always start by asking, what are your motivations? Why do you want to learn a new language?
Uh-huh.
Is it purely for personal growth, for travel, or are you thinking about, professional opportunities?
I mean, those are great questions
Yeah,
because different languages open up different doors, right?
absolutely. So if someone is really focused on practicality, well, then German's a really strong choice. Millions of people across Europe speak it, and it's a big deal in business and academics, too.
I've heard that German, while practical, can be pretty tough grammar-wise. Would something like Dutch be a better place to start?
Yeah.
For someone who's maybe a busy professional but still wants to try out a Germanic language?
That's a really good point. Dutch is known for being, I guess you could say, a little easier on the grammar side compared to German. And, like we talked about before, it can be a great stepping stone to other Germanic languages. So, yeah, if someone's looking for that balance, practical but also not too overwhelming, Dutch could be a good fit.
Okay. What about those more adventurous languages we discussed, the ones that are a bit more, I don't know, off the beaten path? What would you suggest for someone who's drawn to those?
Oh, for someone looking for a truly unique linguistic and cultural experience, I'd still say go for Icelandic. It might be a bit tougher, yeah, but the payoff is huge. Imagine being able to read those ancient sagas in their original language or connecting with a culture that's really preserved its linguistic heritage. It's pretty special.
It does sound pretty incredible. Like, you're stepping back in time, immersing yourself in that world of Vikings and sagas.
Exactly. But if someone wants something a little less intense, something that's, well, known for being easier to learn, maybe Norwegian or Swedish would be a better fit. They're both pretty accessible for English speakers, and they open up that whole world of Scandinavian culture.
See, this is what I love about exploring language families. It's not just some abstract concept. It's about how language connects to, our real lives, our goals, our interests. It's about finding that language that just speaks to you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that's what we really want you to take away from this deep dive. Germanic languages, they're not just entries in a textbook. They're living, breathing ways of communicating that have shaped history, culture, and even the way we think.
And who knows? Maybe this deep dive has, lit a spark for you, our listener. Maybe you'll be inspired to explore one of these languages even further, to uncover its secrets and connect with, a whole new community.
And no matter where your language journey takes you, remember, every word you learn, every little bit of grammar you figure out, it's like adding another thread to this huge tapestry of human communication.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It really shows the power of language and the connections we make through it.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Germanic languages. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Absolutely. But before we go, we want to leave you with one final thought. We've explored the past, the present, and even a glimpse into the future of these languages. But ultimately, it's the people who speak them who determine their fate. So whether you decide to learn a new language to support those working to preserve them, or just to simply appreciate the amazing diversity of languages out there, remember, you have a part to play in shaping the future of these incredible languages.
Well said.
Until next time, happy exploring.